All right, let's go ahead and dive in. Thank you for joining us this morning on the Technology Truths webinar series. This is episode 1, Automation, the Future is Now. A few housekeeping items. There will be some question and answer sessions at the tail end of this, but if you do have any questions along the way, please use your Ring Central control panel. There's a Q&A button there that you'll be able to submit a question and we'll answer those as we move through the content today. There'll also be some interactive polling happening. There'll be a window that pops up. You can simply answer the question and proceed on. Or again, you can use the Ring Central control panel to click on your polls. So a little bit of background. We're doing this webinar series. As you would imagine, there's a ton of content being curated in the industry right now. And we really wanted to give some of our SMEs the opportunity to really cut through the product sales and the services positioning and really speak to some technology truths. So with that being said, let's dive into the content. My name is Jarrell Hall, the Chief Technology Officer here at Alchemy Technology Group, really establishing the technology vision and bringing that to market for our customers and our partners. Joining me today on the webinar will be Vid Sista, who serves as the practice principal for our Transform practice. We'll get into some of the details behind that practice here shortly. But again, we appreciate you making time to join us this morning, and hopefully you bring a lot of value back to your organization and some of the topics that we'll address today. But again, if there's any dialogue that you want to have Q&A wise, please use the Q&A button in the control panel. So for those not familiar with Alchemy, we're a national value-added reseller, really stressing the emphasis on value. We're across the nation, 13 national regions, just south of 100 Alchemists at this point. And really what we're proud of is the roster we've assembled when we talk about our talent from a selling perspective, but then also from a consultative and technical resourcing. If you look at some of the numbers kind of quoted there on the slide, really proud of the team that we've assembled here. The marketplace has well received us, and we've done a lot of good things for our customer and partner spaces. And when you look at how we go to market, really we want to turn silos into solutions. So what you'll note on this slide is that there's no products, there's no logos, there's no vendor representation here. We really want to focus on understanding the business outcomes that our customers desire and really focus on building a solution that meets those needs as opposed to always leading with a distinct product and or service. So when you look across identities, devices, apps, content, networks, operations, all of these things have been impacted by not only COVID itself, but the digital transformational world that we find ourselves in today. That being the case, we've organized our way with 3 primary practices: the experience practice, the protect practice, and transform. Today's automation session centers on that transform practice. So with that being the case, I'd like to bring Vid Sista into the discussion. And Vid, would you give the attendees a little bit of background on the transform practice at large?
Sure. Thanks, Jarrell, for the introduction. So when we talk about transform, there's really 3 key areas that we focus on. The first being cloud strategy and adoption. And this is really helping customers understand what should move to the cloud and what shouldn't. Most customers are looking at more of a hybrid and multi-cloud approach. And so really helping them to understand what should they move to the cloud, how to do that securely, and really laying out a roadmap for them to do that successfully. The second area is to focus on data center transformation. For those customers looking for bringing that cloud-like experience into the data center and building out a private cloud, we help with hyperconverged infrastructure, next-gen data protection, and other solutions to really give them the cloud experience in their own on-premise data centers. And then the topic that we're going to really talk about today is process automation. And there's a few different areas around process automation, but that's really one key focus area that we're seeing, especially around digital transformation, is automation.
Now, you bring up a good buzzword there, Vid. We've heard a lot about automation even before the COVID pandemic set its sights on the IT industry. You mind giving the audience a little bit of background of kind of the automation constructs and how we see those positioning in the marketplace today?
Yeah, absolutely. There's several types of automation, but I like to categorize them into 3 main buckets. The first bucket being scripting and infrastructure as code. And that's primarily focused in IT, and the goal is to really automate infrastructure or build out and configure systems. And so think of things like Python, Ansible, Terraform, or PowerShell, very command line heavy, but the goal is really to build out infrastructure and systems very rapidly. The second bucket is workflow automation. And the focus there is streamlining work as it moves from one business unit to another. So if you think of like a factory moving from one station to another. But this requires changing the process to fit within the platform that you're using. So some of the tools in that space are Nintex or Zapier, Microsoft's Power Automate, but they're reliant on API connectors to engage with all of your external systems. So if anyone has worked with these tools before, you know that those APIs aren't always available for every one of your applications, or if they are, they're limited in some of their function. And I also count business process automation tools like ServiceNow, Salesforce, Oracle, and IBM in this bucket as well. The point being that you have to adapt your process to fit into the platform, and that typically requires a lot of time and effort, very large projects, cross-departmental planning, and coordination. So there's definitely value in those. But the third bucket is robotic process automation, RPA, which is going to be the topic of today's conversation. And what RPA does and that differentiates from the other two buckets is it's essentially emulating human interaction with your existing systems. So think of it as hiring a digital employee to do the same work as your human employee, but they're doing it extremely fast and accurate. It doesn't rely on APIs or back-end development between the systems, so it's more universal in its application. And if a human can click, copy, read, save, or otherwise interact with that application, there's a high probability that RPA can automate those tasks. And that's really why it's gaining so much momentum right now, is that universal application without having to own access to the back-end systems you're trying to integrate.
Appreciate that background, Vid. So as many of the attendees are probably going to attest to, there's a lot of rhetoric out there around what can solve COVID challenges, what the business landscape is going to look like. And I know RPA is right in the crosshairs of that fact and fiction debate. You want to outline some of those for the attendees here, just to kind of weed right through it?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of buzz in the industry and some misconceptions. So the first thing, let's just start off with the first bullet point there under the facts. Robots improve productivity as robots get more done in less time. This is absolutely true. When we've deployed RPA, the bots actually move very quickly and accurately, and in a lot of cases, we actually have to slow down the workflow because the bots move faster than the applications can load and process. So they are very fast at getting things done. Moving over to the fiction side, a lot of times I hear that RPA projects are expensive and only for large enterprises. And I think what happened here is that a lot of the Fortune 100 organizations were early adopters. And so a lot of the use cases that were published around success stories were around these Fortune 100 companies spending, upwards of millions of dollars or more and leveraging, Accentures and Deloittes of the world for those projects. And I think that led to a lot of that misconception. Moving back over to another one of the facts, RPA reduces or eliminates the risk of errors. That's absolutely true. They don't make mistakes the way that humans do. So there's no fat fingering of the keyboard or missing steps in the process. It's going to process it exactly the same every single time. And that eliminates a lot of the errors that we typically see in some of these manual processes. Going over to the fiction side, robots will replace humans. So this is partly true. So part of the goal around RPA is to reduce the amount of manual effort that's involved. And in a lot of cases, that means that you can take a manual process that has a team of 10 to 12 folks down to maybe one or two and assisted with robots to do it quickly in the same amount of time. But what we see happening there is that, moving over to the facts, the employee satisfaction increases. And what that means is that you have folks that are no longer doing manual, repetitive, mundane tasks, but you're freeing them up to be able to do other meaningful work. I haven't really talked to a whole lot of folks that don't have a backlog of projects that they would love to get to if only they had time. And so what we see with RPA deployments is that employees are really able to focus on those more value-driven projects and less on the mundane tasks. Another thing that I typically hear going over to the fiction side is that IT can automate anything using scripts and code without RPA. I think that's kind of a testament to the pride that we have in our technical capabilities, being able to write scripts and code and do things like that. However, it's a lot of reinventing the wheel. And so typically once we do some demos and show the IT team, here's what you can accomplish with RPA, they start to understand that while they can probably use some scripts and do some of the things that RPA can do, it's not sustainable or scalable. The other component that we talk about under the facts is that RPA does not require setting up APIs, and that's true. While there are some APIs built in to allow cleaner integration with applications, it's not required. So the key difference with RPA is that you're using the same front-end system that the user is using to input data, extract data, or manipulate data, and so you don't necessarily have to have access to the back end through an API, and that's what makes it so universal. Looking at another bullet point on fiction, RPA projects can take years to deploy. If you look at the totality of what RPA can do, if you want to automate everything that you could possibly automate within an organization, it could potentially take more than a year. But a lot of our pilot projects that we've done have been done in a couple of days. And many of the projects that we do for our initial pilot deployment can be done in a matter of a few weeks. So RPA projects, again, when you look at the early adopters and these large organizations talking about what they've done within a year or 2 years, that's looking at multiple processes being automated, not necessarily a single process. So you can get very rapid ROI. There is a fact also that not all processes are fit. So when we look at a process, we want to make sure that it does make sense and there is ROI with automating that particular process. So there are some things that just simply don't fit for RPA, but the vast majority of processes that are manual can be automated. And the last fiction bullet point is that we've tried automation in the past and it doesn't work. In those cases where I have talked to folks that have tried it and failed, there's a lot of entrance into the RPA world right now. So since it is a hot topic, there's a lot of organizations saying, hey, we do RPA, and a lot of Me Too companies. When I find that automation projects with RPA have not been successful, it's usually because either the wrong process was selected to be automated or the wrong tool. So it's either a niche vendor in the space that just kind of entered, or the first RPA tool that the customer came across. But if you're using one of the tried and true products that has a lot of deployments within the organization, within the industry, then these RPA projects have been extremely successful and seen a lot of value.
Awesome, I appreciate that, and it's good clarity for me, and I'm pretty sure some of the actual attendees. I went ahead and kicked out a poll for the participants. If you would, go ahead and click in that and complete it for us, just to gain some insight on where different organizations are when it comes to RPA. And to help guide this conversation, I know seeing is believing, and understanding where it fits in the marketplace. That is how we see some of our customers gain traction. Let's talk through some of the real world examples that we're seeing, not only apply in today's landscape, but potential opportunities where they can take it back and maybe kickstart an RPA initiative at their organization.
Yeah, absolutely. There's dozens and dozens of use cases across several different business units, and I'll touch on just a couple of them here as examples. But the very first one is invoice processing. This is a very common use case because every organization has invoices they need to process. So they've got accounts payable. And really what they're looking to do is streamline that invoice processing so that they can make on-time and accurate payments with a smaller team. So organizations here, when they have a wide variety of invoices, they typically have to continue staffing up in order to process those more accurately and quickly. So what we've been able to do in all those cases is to leverage RPA with optical character recognition, or OCR, to automate the end-to-end process from receipt to payment. So to give you an example, we have the bot basically monitoring an inbox, an email inbox, and as those invoices come in PDF format, even if the format is different for different vendors, we've been able to configure it to look at the invoice in PDF, read the relevant information from that PDF document, and then input it into the payment processing tool, verify that the information is correct, do some automation around the validity of the invoice, whether or not it needs to be paid, and to go ahead and then process those payments through those different systems. And so regardless of what type of accounting system is in use, or as long as a PDF comes in PDF format, whatever type of format that invoice comes in, we've been able to program that bot to be able to read it, process it, and go ahead and make those payments. So that's a very common one. A lot of the use cases around finance and accounting are very manual in their nature, and so that's typically where a lot of RPA projects start. Oftentimes I get asked around, what are some use cases within IT? And while you don't necessarily want to start RPA with IT, once you've gotten other use cases built out, IT should take advantage of the solution as well. So one of them is around DR or patch application testing. So typically what happens during patches or DR scenarios or any upgrades is that there's a certain level of functional testing that's done, but inevitably what happens is that once you go past your change window, and then the users get in and start doing some things within their application, something broke, but you just didn't get a chance to test it. So what RPA has allowed us to do is to get those end users to actually help map out what would they normally do on a day-to-day basis. So what are things that they need to test? And so we have the bot basically perform those functions. So once we've done either an upgrade or a patch or even just to do DR testing, we'll let the bot quickly open up those applications, run through several steps that the end user would normally do, and then come back with either a pass or fail. So then we're able to know, not only doing functional testing, but end user testing without having to have the application owners present during those change control windows, which are typically in the middle of the night or on weekends. And it can test through several different critical applications very rapidly. So you can still do all that testing within your change control window. So that's one example around IT that we've been able to see. And then data validation to improve customer service. So we've got several different organizations that just, they have processes that they do as part of either revenue generating or part of their normal function in interacting with customers. This particular one is an example for an insurance policy broker. So they work with several different insurance companies, and then they broker those policies with the end customer. And so what they have to do is go through hundreds of different policies with different multiple providers, and they have to compare the policy that's listed in the provider's website against the policy that they have in their CRM, and to make sure that whether the user information is correct, the date of birth is correct, the policy details are correct, and several other elements of data. And so what the robot does is it will actually go through, and for each of those records in the CRM, it will log into each of those providers' websites, navigate to that policy, open it up, and do a data comparison between what's in the website and what's in the CRM. And if it finds anything that's incorrect based on what we've told the bot to do, it will go ahead and update the CRM with the correct information. If there is any anomaly that we feel like, hey, this is something you want a human to review, it will flag all of those and then send a daily digest to the agent. So instead of that agent now having to go and go through hundreds of policies for multiple providers, they get just a handful of items that need to be reviewed for accuracy, and the bot has actually processed all the other ones. So this is just 3 examples, but I mean, there's dozens and dozens of examples across different industries and business units.
Awesome. That's great feedback and great insight on the topics and the use cases there. I mean, when we bring this to reality, right? So we know that budgets have been impacted. We know that the teams are being shrank by the moment. A lot of the decision makers are having to make tough calls. RPA, all these new innovative things, cloud, these are all, very buzzword type of concepts, and a lot of these are going to be uphill battles to get funding and staffing for that. So, really to help our attendees here get these things across the goal line, what's some of the guidance there around, maybe the cost impacts or the budgets and the staffing required for these type of initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that, right now more than ever, every IT budget item and, project request or software or hardware request is being extremely scrutinized. I think RPA is a little bit unique though. And here's the reason why. So there's a study by the Hackett Group that actually interviewed several CFOs early this year, probably mid when COVID started to take place. So some of these numbers are probably not as high as they would be today. But they basically asked them, what are you guys doing to balance cost reduction and still adding value to the company, right? So while you're in cost cutting mode, you still have to run a business and you still have to be profitable. So talking to these CFOs, they asked them, well, what are your priorities? The number one priority that they said was that they were expecting budgets to shrink by 3.4%. I think that number is a lot higher now, based on when they did the initial survey. But cost reduction was the top issue for them. So they had to balance how are they going to reduce costs, but also be profitable. And they plan to streamline work using digital technology. Another quote from this group of CFOs that were surveyed, the area where their most growth is expected was going to be focused on RPA and advanced analytics. So the advanced analytics piece makes sense because they're looking at making data-driven decisions on where to cut costs, but also where to focus and invest money. But RPA was one of the things that they cited as an area of focus. And they had the highest projected growth rates compared to 2019. So if they're already investing in RPA, they expected to invest more. And if they weren't investing in RPA, that's an area that they cited as this is where we're going to put our money. And it makes a lot of sense because automation allows you to do a whole lot more with a smaller staff. So looking at the numbers, a typical RPA deployment is going to save you at least 3 FTEs. So when we're looking at organizations where they've had to furlough and some of those that headcount can't come back, or they have a backlog of projects that need to get done, but they simply can't hire the headcount that they'd originally planned to do, deploying RPA can help you to still achieve that same level of productivity without necessarily having to hire headcount, which in most organizations is kind of the most expensive item on your balance sheet. And a robotic workforce can operate 90% quicker than humans, right? So you get massive productivity gains because those robots can be programmed to work 24/7 around the clock. So you're not necessarily relying on an 8 to 5. The other benefits is that those robots can work in a data center. I know a lot of states have started to relax some of these social distancing guidelines, but there's organizations that are still allowing their employees to work from home. Those bots can operate within the data center on a virtual machine. They don't necessarily have to be remote. If processing certain types of processes can't be done remotely over VPN or can't be done remotely over a virtual desktop, those bots can operate, as if they're physically on-prem. And then the RPA is system independent. So, while we look at other types of technology that are focused around IT and making IT more efficient, IT is still typically seen as a cost center, but RPA is system independent. So it can have an impact in finance, it can have an impact in HR, it can have an impact on your revenue generating business units. So it's applicable across all departments. And most businesses that have deployed RPA have seen that ROI in excess of 300% in the first year, right? So if you go back to the RPA saving at least 3 FTEs, if you deploy a bot and that bot is the cost of like 1 FTE, you can see how that ROI can quickly increase, and it continues past the first year. So typically, after you've deployed the first set of processes and set of bots, then you see what's capable. You start to look around other departments and say, well, what else can we automate?
Great. And on this subject, we actually got a question in from the attendees in regards to, can you talk to the considerations that decision makers need to have when it comes to supporting RPA in their organizations? Do you see them typically creating role-specific teams, or is it something that's traditionally outsourced and kind of project-based?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. And it's unique to the organization. So there's a couple of different ways that I've seen it deployed. Most organizations will leverage expertise outside to quickly deploy RPA within their organization while they shadow. So the idea is that while you can learn it yourself, the time to value is stretched out if you don't bring in an external entity to help you to deploy it. So bring in an expert to deploy that first bot. And while you're doing that, you have some subject matter experts in the organization to shadow. And whether or not you have several developers in the organization, or if you've only got a couple, depends on the size of your organization, how many developers you have, how big is your budget for that. The way that I've seen a lot of organizations successfully deployed is they'll have one or two primary developers that are very strong within their organization to help build out new bots, right? So whether they hire or outsource that piece, that number is very small. And then what you start to have is more citizen developers within each department, because the process itself has to be understood. So if it's a finance process, you need someone in finance that understands what the end result is supposed to be. So typically you'll have somebody in the finance department or HR department or other departments that is somewhat technically savvy, that has gone through RPA training, and because it is more GUI based and visually, the development is a little bit more visual, low code, no code, although there's, I would say, more low code than no code. Those department level folks have either been repurposed. So it could be someone that, you had 3 people doing a manual process, now you only need 1. Well, one of those other people might decide, hey, I want to learn more about RPA. I understand the process, and now I'm going to be a citizen developer. So you're kind of distributing that workforce. As organizations start to build out more and more automation, then we typically advise building out a center of excellence. And that center of excellence is charged with identifying what are the different types of processes, requests that are coming in, prioritizing them to determine, okay, well, is this a process that we want to automate first? Where does it fit in the list? Having your developers map those out, and then kind of deploying those with a set of guidelines and governance to that department, and then allowing that department to manage it in-house for some of the minor break fix, but then escalate to your kind of more seasoned developers as needed. The other model that we've seen is that some organizations have opted to deploy it and then just outsource the support. So basically leverage either an offshore or onshore team when they have a ticket or an issue to help support that environment. They just outsource it. That's basically if they decide they don't want to hire in-house to be able to provide the support. So I've seen a few different models, but hopefully that helps answer your question. But it is very, very organization dependent.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. And I think that's good feedback. And we are definitely seeing more of those RPA maintenance plan type services creep up, because when you talk about process that's driving revenue generating activities, obviously mean time to failure, returning service, all of those different things that would normally apply to a human still apply to the process. So great insights there, Vid. So as we shift our attention at large in the world of getting back to business, kind of bring this home for the audience, how would we focus and really, organize our thoughts and encourage our decision makers to really go after this, wholeheartedly, and where do they start?
Yeah, absolutely. So our most of our contacts are within IT, and so when we talk to folks in IT, I'll usually get some response if RPA is already used in the organization that, yeah, we have RPA, but it's a different department. Someone else over here is using RPA. And really what I would like to see is that because it's a digital transformation tool, that IT has more of a seat at the table in driving some of those initiatives. So in those cases, if you have RPA within the organization already, as an IT leader, get more engaged outside of just providing the underlying systems that RPA runs on, but to understand how RPA is being used within those different business units. If RPA is not already being used within your organization, this is an opportunity for IT to bring something that's going to add a tremendous amount of value, provide ROI, and really help IT be seen as a thought leader within the organization. Now, once you get started with RPA, there's a few best practices you want to look at. The first one is identifying processes that are ideal for automation. And there's a way to calculate whether it makes sense. How often is this process being done? Are all the inputs and outputs digital in format? What's the frequency that you do it? Is it once a year? Is it every day? How long does it take? And how many individuals do you have doing that process? So in a lot of cases, when we're trying to identify the process, if it makes more sense to hire an intern to do the work, then you should go that route. But once you've identified the type of process, then that's really where you want to start. And I would encourage you to start outside of IT. Again, most organizations are going to see IT as a cost center, and trying to find a tool that's going to help you do your job more efficiently is not something they're interested in. But if you can find a use case that's in finance or in HR or in accounting, that's going to get the CFO's attention and get the business's attention. The next thing to do is really to start small, but with an easy and relevant process. So, I see a lot of organizations thinking that, hey, I've got to go, let's go grab the most challenging one that we think is going to add the most value and start there. But I would caution you to do that. The thing that you want to do is to have a quick win, and show a very rapid value in that particular technology, and get the wheels turning for the business units. So find one that's easy, that you can get done in maybe a couple of weeks, to pilot. And even if it's not if it's not automating the entire process end to end, if you can automate a piece of it, the goal is to be able to show, here's what's possible, right? So once you have that pilot done, what we've done for a lot of customers is we'll record it, and show that. So then our IT contact can go take that to other business units and show that recording and say, hey, here's a process that we do manually today, and here's what we did with a bot within a very short pilot time frame, less than a week. And here's what's possible, right? So at that point, then they start to get interest from the business units and from the executives, who then want to see a little bit more and say, okay, well, here, let's find the right process to do a pilot. And then once you do that pilot, then at that point, you can go ahead and start to say, okay, we're going to put this into production, see rapid time to value, and then at that point, it snowballs, right? What else can we automate? And usually what will happen is that once you've done that pilot and deployed it, word gets around within the organization, and other business units start coming to the table saying, hey, we have some processes we would like to automate as well. And that's really how the automation goes from starting with 1 to 2 bots to organizations that have 50 to over 100 bots that are doing multiple processes across different business units. So that's really the way that I would encourage the folks on this call to try to approach it.
Perfect. And in the effort to just refine our message and go-to-market strategy, as we are seeing RPA kick out another poll just to understand from the audience, what's the most impactful ways a partner like Alchemy continue to help you support either initiating an RPA project or continuing to build momentum behind something you may have actively going on at this point in time? Because we do find that most organizations are at some point in that journey. We just want to make sure that we're being meaningful and impactful and partnering to get some business outcomes realized. So thanks, Vid, for that prioritization. Gonna open it up for Q&A, and then we'll have some closing thoughts. Couple that came in, Vid, I'll just rattle them off and we can kind of go organically. You mentioned developers when we had the question around forming an RPA team. What type of skill sets, if you would expand upon that, are typically you see in an organization when it comes to building either that team or that developer skill set itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the top RPA tools have been built in a way that they want to make it easy for a citizen developer. So their thought process is, if you can record, so basically press record and then perform the action, the bot should be able to take as much of that information as possible and build out the workflow for you automatically. So in a lot of cases, a large chunk of the most basic processes can be built without having a lot of developer or scripting knowledge. Where you start getting into needing a little bit more of that skill set is when you're starting to build a lot of logic into it, right? A lot of if this happens, then do this. If not, then do this in a loop several times. So the goal is to really have it to where you can take some basic training, and there's a lot of free training available for a lot of the top RPA products that are out on the market. They offer free training, so you can go and become a citizen developer, by taking some of this online training. And at that point, you'll be able to look at a process that's in place and be able to troubleshoot it. So if some element changes within the process, say the application got upgraded and, a button's moved or the name of a particular field has been changed, you can typically go in and fix that yourself without being an in-depth senior developer. But for most organizations, you need to have at least 1 or 2 of those senior developers to be able to deploy those more complex processes, or you can, again, you can outsource that. But in the vast majority of the deployments, it's, you got a lot of the folks that are citizen developers that are, didn't start off with a developer background and didn't start off with that skill set. but they kind of looked at their career and said, okay, well, I want to up level my skill set. I'm going to go and learn RPA and learn the basics to be able to troubleshoot or build out some basic processes without having to be a seasoned developer. And I think that's the beauty of RPA, is that it doesn't require a deep technical knowledge to automate basic processes. More complex ones does require that. But I think for the RPA vendors that are out on the market, what you'll hear them say is that they are envisioning a bot on every desktop, right? So as an individual, giving me the tools to be able to automate some of my own processes without having to leverage IT or an external developer. They're providing more and more of those tools to be able to automate basic processes, for power users as well.
Okay. Another question: do vendors typically conduct some type of ROI analysis to help sell automation platform adoption?
Absolutely, yeah. I would say that all the vendors have the methodology built out for helping you to provide and show the ROI. So they've got ROI calculators that you can plug in the amount of processes, how long does it take, how many people do it, what's the output, how many systems are involved. So there is a way to calculate that. Typically, the way that we at Alchemy approach it a little bit differently is that we're not looking at specifically, can this RPA tool automate your process, but we're also asking the question, should it? So while if you get the vendor involved, they are going to look at the ROI for their tool. What we've done in some instances, we saw a use case where there was some manual report generation that the client was asking if we can automate that. We looked at that process and said, absolutely, you can automate that with RPA, but there's no reason you should. You really should be looking at a BI tool that will allow you more flexibility and being able to generate those reports. So I think the value that we provide is a little bit more of a vendor agnostic view of that ROI and whether or not RPA is the right tool, because sometimes it's not. And so those are things we're able to provide. But when you get the vendor involved, yes, they will be able to provide ROI for their tool, or you can leverage Alchemy to kind of provide that for you, more of a vendor agnostic approach.
Okay. Let me see if there's any other questions that have come in the Q&A. Can you please provide examples of known bad processes to attempt RPA automation?
Yes. So there's a couple of them where we looked at the process and there wasn't enough consistency. So when we went through a process and started to look at, okay, well, you're moving data from A and then you want to put it enter it into your CRM system. Okay, how do you know which field this is? And the answer for every one of those questions was, well, I just know. And in that case, the bot can't replace the human knowledge unless you have it documented somewhere. And in that case, there was just a ton of tribal knowledge, and there was really no consistency with each record coming in, or a way for the bot to be able to identify how to categorize it. So in that case, that was a case where we just said, hey, we can't automate that until one of two things happens. Either you document everything that's in that person's head and kind of the I just know into a digital format, a spreadsheet or a document that we can read from. So that would be one case. The other cases are typically things where the data input is not in a digital readable format, right? So it's a handwritten invoice or handwritten document where OCR has a hard time because of the handwriting is not legible for it to be able to translate. So if it's a PDF where the document is typed out, it can recognize those and read it. If it's a handwritten invoice or a handwritten document that's the input, those are, again, ones that somehow needs to be translated into a digital format before the RPA piece can start. And then the other example would be ones where it's just the ROI wasn't there, right? There was examples of the process wasn't done often enough. The amount of time that it took to do the process, while it was annoying, it didn't take an overly large amount of time. There weren't a lot of individuals that were doing that. And so basically, when we looked at the scope to build it out with RPA versus a typical cost of like a college intern, we recommended just saying, hey, just hire an intern to come do this. There's not enough volume for this manual process to justify the cost of deploying RPA for it. So those are a few examples, but it's going to be case by case. But we'll evaluate all of those things to see whether or not it makes sense to automate or not.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. So before I give it to you Vic, for a closing thought, I definitely want to address the participants that we are seeing an uptick in RPA. The reason behind this session in particular is to give the vendor agnostic kind of opinion on where we're seeing RPA use really focus as we see, COVID-19 as again impacting staffing levels, budgets. So we do see that there's a need in the marketplace. We've seen a lot of accelerated adoption of the platforms. But again, not leading with any platform in particular. The conversation itself is extremely relevant, and hopefully you've taken some insights away from the session. But Vid, I want to hand it to you for any closing thoughts before we release the audience.
Yeah, I would say that if you haven't seen RPA in action, there's plenty of YouTube videos out there. Just Google RPA demo. You'll be able to see a lot of different platforms. If you get to a point where you want to see whether or not your particular process makes sense to automate or not, and get some ideas, we'd be happy to do a demo for you and kind of walk through the thought process on picking the right process and the right tool to automate. But if you haven't looked at RPA, definitely take a look at it. If your organization's already doing RPA, highly encourage you to get more involved and understand how you can be a part of that initiative.
Thanks, Vic. And this session will be posted along with the other 2 installments that we have scheduled for tomorrow and Thursday. So please make time if you can attend those sessions as well. And if there's a colleague or coworker that wasn't able to attend this session, we'll get the link posted out to the Alchemy website. But I appreciate your time today. Hopefully you've gained some insights and take it back to your organization, further your RPA initiative, or maybe initiate one yourself. But thank you for joining. Have a great day.